Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Diva Klein, coming to you live from Israel with all of the biggest headlines from across the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. Let's jump into all of the latest developments at this hour. All eyes today are on Davos and the World Economic Forum, where global leaders and lawmakers congregate to discuss global matters. But on the sidelines of this annual event, U.S. President Donald Trump has gathered 20 leaders of various nations to sign the charter to his Board of Peace. According to Trump, the board will serve as an international peace-building body to address global conflicts and further down the line, potentially rebuild Gaza. Trump will head the board, of course, with the executive committee announced to include Tony Blair, Mark Carney, Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner. Now, an hour before the signing, Britain announced they will not be joining Trump's body. This after similar reservations were expressed by many European nations. Trump has invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to participate in the board, a move Britain had quickly condemned. In addition, however, Trump's recent comments that the Board of Peace could replace the United Nations have sparked controversy. Nevertheless, the charter was signed and the board has been inaugurated in Davos today. Trump himself received a standing ovation and showed the signed charter to the crowd before speaking on various regional matters. The American president reiterated the necessity of Hamas disarmament and the return of the final Israeli hostage, Ran Gvili. Take a listen to some key remarks made by the American president.
And I've been very clear that Hamas must return that last remaining deceased hostage as well, and that will be the full commitment. And then we get on to other things, and we're committed to ensuring Gaza is demilitarized, properly governed, and beautifully rebuilt. It's going to be a great plan, and that's where the Board of Peace really started. And I think we can spread out to other things as we succeed with Gaza. We're going to be very successful in Gaza. It's going to be a great thing to watch. And we can do other things. We can do numerous other things. Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do. And we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. You know, I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it.
And that's not all. More movements are coming out of Davos as the head of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, or NCAG, Ali Shaath, has announced that Rafah crossing will be open in both directions as early as next week. Take a listen to the clip that was shown at the forum.
As a first step, I am pleased to announce the Rafah crossing will open next week in both directions. For Palestinians in Gaza, Rafah is more than a gate. It is a lifeline and symbol of opportunity. Opening Rafah signals that Gaza is no longer closed to the future and to the war.
Now, it's important to note that this statement was quickly being refuted by Israeli officials who doubled down, saying that until Ran Gvili is returned, Rafah will remain closed. And we now have breaking news reports that a cabinet meeting is set for the coming days in which they will discuss this matter. Now, the day is still ahead of us, and the World Economic Forum is producing a lot of news. So here to break down some of these headlines and reports is our panel of experts for today. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Advocate Maurice Hirsch of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and Asher Fredman, Executive Director of the Misgav Institute for National Security and a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. I want to thank you both so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So really plenty of updates coming out of Davos right now. But there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect that there is no Israeli representation in the Board of Peace. Now, of course, President Isaac Herzog is in Davos right now for the World Economic Forum. But this big announcement where Trump, inaugurated the board, Israel was missing from the picture. So I'm curious, what is the significance of Israel's absence? Is it to Israel's benefit or disadvantage that global leaders are discussing Gaza and its future without Israel? Advocate Maurice Hirsch, if we could start with you.
So thank you for having me. I think that there are two different sides to this picture. Obviously, Israel has to have and must play an integral part in anything that goes forward in Gaza. we need to see the Gaza Strip demilitarized. We need to ensure that the Gaza Strip no longer poses any threat. But on the one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean that we need to have our involvement and direct involvement directly in Gaza. One of the things that really should happen is that Gaza should be disconnected from Israel. It should be set up as its own entity from which it can prosper, it can rebuild. The reliance on Israel. Israel's still providing electricity to Gaza. Israel's still providing water to Gaza. The fact that Israel is still the gateway into Gaza isn't necessarily in our national best interest. And therefore, putting those two things together, I think, is critical moving forward, eliminating the threats, but at the same time, ensuring that Gaza isn't seen as Israel's problem, but rather a problem that needs to be solved by the international community.
Interesting, because the assessment right now in Israel, at least, is that there's not really a body who can effectively disarm Hamas that isn't the IDF. I mean, the IDF in Israel will have to be involved at some capacity or the other, because all of these promises of Gaza's future are contingent on the disarmament of Hamas, which they've claimed that they wouldn't do so. Asher, what are your thoughts on all this?
But Israel's primary interest in Gaza is to prevent Gaza from once again becoming a severe strategic threat to the state of Israel. And in order to realize the Board of Peace and President Trump's vision for Gaza without Gaza once again enabling Hamas to rebuild itself and to once again threaten Israeli communities, there's going to have to be very close coordination with Israel, whether it goes through Israeli checkpoints. Israel is going to have to be intimately involved in every aspect of what's coming in, what it's being used for, where it's being placed, like it or not. Now, the one problem is that Israel's not on the stage there deciding the Board of Peace. A deeper problem is that some of these countries don't even have formal relations with Israel. Now, of course, there are all kinds of back channels and track twos and open discussions that are happening. But I would say the first step for countries that want to be actually involved in the Board of Peace should be having full open relations with Israel, because full open discourse with Israel is going to be critical for realizing the goal of the Board of Peace. By the way, I don't think it was an accident that the first two countries who were invited to sit with President Trump at that signing of the charter were Morocco and Bahrain, two of the original partners of the Abraham Accords, countries that normalized ties with Israel under the auspices of President Trump.
Mm-hmm. And, I actually want to tie that into the report that we actually gave about the Rafah crossing, because this is an example of Israel not being there in Davos to, sort of draw any red lines. So obviously it's crucial that cooperation with Israel is important in order to achieve these goals in Gaza. But when it comes to the World Economic Forum in Davos and all of these grand announcements that President Trump is giving with his Board of Peace sitting right behind him, does the Trump administration hold significant enough authority to actually move ahead with these plans, or are these sort of just grandiose sort of empty statements, Maurice?
Well, I think, like you clearly said before, that really the gateway into opening Gaza, it isn't opening the Rafah crossing. The gateway into opening Gaza is to ensuring that Hamas is eliminated. At the moment, what we're seeing of the different boards and executives and committees that have been set up, you have one committee, which is the International Stabilization Force, which at the moment is a general without any soldiers. That is something which is going to, obviously, we're going to have to fill that with content. We're going to have to make sure and ensure that Hamas is A, disarmed, B, disbanded, C, prevented from reforming in any other context. There are all types of arguments and reports coming out that Hamas has agreed to potentially give up some of their arms in return for recognition as being a political movement rather than an armed militia. This is something which obviously should be entirely rejected. Hamas as a genocidal ideology should not be allowed to exist in any way, shape, or form. It's like saying that we're going to disarm the Third Reich, but we're going to leave the idea of Nazism in place. That cannot go together. And really anything about opening the Rafah crossing has to be contingent on the immediate return of Ran Gavili, and with the disarmament and disbandment of Hamas. Anything else in that direction is, I think, somewhat of wishful thinking. And as Asher said, not only are some of those members of these committees do not have open relations with Israel, some of them are openly hostile to Israel, like Turkey and Qatar, and their goal is to ensure the survival of Hamas. So all of these, as they were, bumps in the road, which are there to undermine President Trump's vision will need to be ironed out. But it's something that at the moment is really a non-starter going forward, apart from great ideas without practical implementation on the ground.
That's definitely the feeling that we're getting coming out of with all this news coming out of Davos at this point. But I actually want to bring in the NCAG, the Committee for the Administration in Gaza, and their efforts to sort of help disarm Hamas. They would be acting inside Gaza. And they're the ones, of course, who came out with the announcement that the Rafah crossing would be open, something that Israel has denied, but now said that they would discuss in a cabinet meeting. And it doesn't seem like this is a body that is interested in disarming Hamas effectively if they're willing to associate with the so-called disarmament, but letting Hamas remain a political body, which is still remaining in power. And whether they say they're disarmed or not, the power that Hamas will hold in the Strip is simply not sufficient enough to secure Israel's borders. Asher, I'd love to get your thoughts on that and on this Committee for the Administration of Gaza in general. Is this a body that we can trust and work with?
You have these, as Maurice pointed out, you have these committees and various boards and various constructions. But at the end of the day, currently, Hamas has 40,000 armed fighters on the ground. They are fully in control of Western Gaza de facto. Now, there are all these creative ideas, right? Hamas fighters could be integrated into the Gazan police forces or Gazan security forces, and then they give up their Hamas Klitschnikovs and they get Gazan police Klitschnikovs, and in the morning they put on their Gazan police hats, and only at nighttime they put on their Hamas hats. All these kinds of fictions and then you have massive amounts of cement or construction materials or fiberglass or generators or electricity or electronic components coming into the Strip for reconstruction. And as long as Hamas still controls the ground, they'll tell that truck driver carrying the cement, okay, you drop off half of your cement by the hospital, but the other half of the cement goes 500 meters away where don't tell anybody we happen to be rebuilding another tunnel. And whatever the intentions of this technocratic committee, they have no ability to prevent that. So the only way to prevent that is really to fully disarm Hamas, demilitarize, de-radicalize the territory. We have to remember the yellow line in many parts of Gaza is 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers from the Israeli border. If there is a fake disarmament and Hamas retains its ability to act, it'll be a 5-minute truck drive, a 3-minute motorcycle ride to the border where, God forbid, it could carry out another attack. So disarmament, demilitarization, and frankly, de-radicalization are key necessary components for any kind of better future for Gaza.
Mm-hmm. And when you mention, the de-radicalization as well as disarmament and demilitarization, how it doesn't seem like there's any solvable solution at this point on the table, because it really feels like the only body that can get this done is the IDF if the NCAG is going to be compromised in the same way that we've seen, by the way, from UN relief agencies like UNRWA, who have also been compromised by Hamas in the entire time that they have been operating in the Gaza Strip. There doesn't really seem to be a way out to move forward. Maurice, you're an expert on Palestinian affairs, and you're very well connected with the indoctrination going on in the Gaza Strip. How crucial is it at this point that Israel come in and take care of that component before moving on to reconstruction?
So I think that obviously is a critical element in any plan for the Gaza Strip. It's not only taking away the weapons, it's a combination of desire and ability. The ability is the weapons. They take their weapons and they murder Jews. If you can take away their desire to murder Jews, which is the denazification, the de-radicalization, changing the entire school curriculum, obviously never allowing the Palestinian Authority or any of its branches or any of its organs to ever set foot again into the Gazan education system, is a critical factor going forward. It means dismantling any type of involvement of the Palestinian Authority in education in the Gaza Strip. And there are alternatives. And some of those alternatives are already on the table. It's adopting, for example, a school curriculum put out by the UAE. These are curriculums which have taken tremendous steps forward in the last 2-3 decades. It's the possibilities that allowed for the development of the Abraham Accords. And it's something which is critical. If the Gazan children continue to learn that you have to hate Israel and aspire for Israel's destruction at any cost, then we will again see the same movement of destruction and genocidal desire rising up again, even if momentarily we succeed in taking away Hamas's weapons. So changing that whole infrastructure is something which is critical. Possibly even Israel should consider, and the boards of peace should consider setting up the new schools in the yellow zone, ensuring that those schools are controlled by pro-peace forces that teach a curriculum which provides for hope and coexistence rather than hate and murder. Those should be possibly some of the strategic goals going forward as to what can be done in those areas that are not under the Hamas control.
But it really feels like a lot of these, all these goals that you're mentioning are contingent on one another. I'm curious, like, which one comes first? What do you think is the most crucial to attack, Maurice? And then, Asher, I'd love to also get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that all of them obviously have to go. I don't think you have to have a binary approach. You can work about dismantling and disarming Hamas on the one hand, ensuring that they no longer have any governance capabilities in the Gaza Strip, even in the area that isn't controlled by the IDF. And then for the areas that are under the control of the IDF, and together with the Board of Peace, or together with the Executive Committee, whatever it may be, or even the National Committee for Gaza, then design the future of Gaza, both from a de-radicalization point of view, but no less critically, we have to understand that we have to provide economic and financial opportunities and hope for the people living there. They haven't seen stability for a very long time. We need to provide jobs, or the opportunity for jobs. We need to provide an economy. We need to provide housing, not we as in Israel, but the international community. Provide hope, because leaving the Gazans under the control of genocidal terrorists, whether it be from Hamas or from Fatah, the PLO, is not an option and will only guarantee more and more violence. And so taking that in a different direction, ensuring that 75% of the Gaza Strip are no longer refugees. They live in houses. They don't live in shanty towns condemned by UNRWA to eternal victimhood. This is not something which is in Israel's interest to see anymore, and it would certainly be in the international community's interest to ensure that that picture no longer dominates the Gaza Strip, but rather there's a picture of hope, of development, of prosperity, rather than just hatred and the desire to destroy Israel.
Absolutely. And Asher, your 2 cents on the path forward?
So first of all, it's important to point out that there are people, certainly President Trump and some of the people affiliated with the various executive committees, advisors to the Board of Peace, who are truly committed to Israel's security and committed to a more peaceful future for Israel and for Gaza. And it's important to recognize that. But as always, the devil is in the details. And I think the sequencing is indeed very important. We should, before we see massive reconstruction, certainly the influx of dual-use items, we have to see, is Hamas going to give up its weapons or not? Will they, I think Maurice's suggestion of a new school curriculum, will they accept a new school curriculum based on tolerance and peace or not? Will we give up this idea, if we're going to rebuild Gaza, then there should obviously no longer be refugee camps or refugees in Gaza, right? This idea that most of the population in Gaza is just waiting to return to cities in Israel is part of what maintains this genocidal desire to carry out terror attacks on October 7th, was this idea of returning to Israel by the former refugees. So I'll have to see, are the people of Gaza, the Technocratic Committee, are they willing to give up this idea of refugee camps, of refugees? Are we going to get the maps of the tunnels? When I was serving in Gaza about a month ago, I was on a base less than a mile from the border, and Hamas was looking for one of the murdered hostages, and they knew there was a tunnel in the area, and they were looking for the entrance to that tunnel. And Israel didn't know about that tunnel. So we know there are Hamas tunnels that Israel does not know about, that still exist less than a mile from Israel's border. Is Hamas going to truly give all that information so those tunnels can be destroyed? So certainly before we see, if we want any kind of economic redevelopment plan to succeed, we have to first see whether or not Hamas is willing to truly disarm and Gaza Strip be de-radicalized.
Absolutely. And I want to actually pivot back to the Board of Peace and all the developments coming out of Davos right now. Actually, not Davos in particular, but President Putin, Vladimir Putin, has pledged to invest $1 billion in the Board of Peace to advance Gaza's reconstruction efforts. And this, of course, follows his meeting with PA President Mahmoud Abbas, which is happening right now. You can see the images on your screen. This seems like a disaster for Israel, because Israel was adamant from the start that when it comes to phase 2 of Gaza, when it comes to its reconstruction, the PA cannot be involved. And it goes back to what Maurice was saying about indoctrination and the PA, school system. If the PA is working with Putin and Putin is investing large sums of money in this Board of Peace, and he's also very involved in the Board of Peace, so much so that Britain has said that they would not join Trump's Board of Peace because Putin is on it, this seems like bad news for Israel. Maurice, what do you make of all this?
I think that any investment that President Putin puts into the Palestinian Authority is just going to be a sunk loss. It's not going anywhere to the Palestinian people. It's not going for the development of Gaza. It will simply go into the pockets of the Fatah, PLO, PA cronies. It's something that we've seen over and over and over again. The PA, I would imagine, is trying to tell President Putin that they have some type of presence or capability of developing a presence in the Gaza Strip. This is just this is about as true as their claim that they actually govern any of the cities in Judea and Samaria, apart from Ramallah. Mahmoud Abbas pretends to be the president of a non-existent state, but really he's barely the mayor of a little town north of Jerusalem. And so all of these moves, I think, should be seen in the context of the PA as a failed mechanism, and that any attempt to really push money, invest money into the PA is simply going to go to waste, and it's a shame, and it really won't achieve any of the goals.
Mm-hmm. And Asher, your thoughts on the PA and their involvement with President Putin?
Well, we've seen most of the Arab Gulf states cut their funding to the PA because they, as Morris pointed out, they realize the PA is ineffective, is corrupt. We'll have to see whether or not any of these hugs and smiles for the cameras turn into anything more substantial. There's also a very significant question about President Abbas is a 90-year-old chain smoker, I think in the 20 or 21st year of his 4-year term. We're already seeing jockeying between different power brokers and terrorist groups and local clans and local terror groups and various members of the PA and Fatah and Tanzim and PLO. They're all sort of jockeying for power the day after Abbas, whenever that comes. I think we're already seeing the decentralization of power from the PA, from Ramallah, from the centralized government. I think we're likely to see a continuation of that trend where different powerful actors and clans and factions and terror groups take control of different parts of Judea and Samaria. And then the question is, does the PA, whether in Judea and Samaria or the Gaza, to what degree is it relevant other than going to diplomatic meetings and shaking hands for the cameras?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And there's definitely a lot of more developments that are coming out that are all tied in together. But we are almost out of time, and we do have to kind of wrap up and reach our closing remarks. Are these fateful days for the region? Are all of these, statements and sentiments coming out of Davos, whether it be from Trump or from other various leaders in this Board of Peace, are we going to see relevant, significant change in the coming weeks? What do you both think, Maurice, if you can start?
So I think just note the relevance of Davos taking part on one hand, the Board of Peace, and on the other hand, you have Mahmoud Abbas visiting Putin in Moscow to get all types of presence. That's interesting in and of itself. I think what we're seeing at the moment in the Middle East is this buildup of a very substantial US force to potentially operate in Iran. That will be a very big change, obviously, for the entire region. Iran's ability to then fund to the tune of $1 billion Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and the Iraqi rebels. This will be something which can possibly be neutralized and allow the area to move on to a different stage where the ideas of the Abraham Accords of peace for the sake of peace, rather than allowing some or the next Palestinian dictator to dictate to the rest of the region what it will look like, who will be friends with whom, who will have peace and relations with whom, is a different story. And that is a change that we are truly, I think, seeing in the coming weeks, in the coming months. And there is going to be, I believe, a substantial change.
Do you believe that the Abraham Accords will be expanded in the coming period? Is that what you're saying?
Certainly, I think there's a great scope for expanding the Abraham Accords. I think there's a much understanding in the Middle East that Israel and the Middle Eastern countries, Israel isn't going anywhere. The objections to Israel, the animosity towards Israel was based on this idea that the Arab countries, in whatever constellation it is, could get together and destroy Israel. They've seen, I think, that idea explode into 1,000 pieces, almost literally over the last 2.5 years. Thanks to Yahya Sinwar bringing down that entire axis of evil, and Israel coming out of this whole conflict as really the strong horse of the Middle East. And now they have no other opportunities to continue. The animosity isn't really a goal within of itself.
That sounds very, very good. I hope it's not too good to be true. Asher, if we can get your closing remarks also on the prospects of the Abraham Accords, but also everything going on in the World Economic Forum right now. Are we seeing fateful days ahead of us?
Well, these are fateful days because President Trump is essentially rewriting the rules of the world order. President Trump has shown again and again his ability to buck conventions and to reach achievements, whether it's the Abraham Accords, whether it is getting the 20 living hostages out of Gaza, that, to be frank, nobody thought possible. And when we see that logo of the Board of Peace with the Western Hemisphere, in the middle of a globe, it seems pretty clear that his ambitions go beyond just Gaza. So in that sense, it certainly is fateful days. What will happen in Iran, the downfall of the Iranian regime would have positive ripple effects across the Middle East and around the world. That remains to be seen. I don't think we've certainly seen the last. I think the Iranian people will continue to protest, and it remains to be seen to what degree help is indeed on the way, as President Trump promised. With regards to Gaza, the question really will be, to what degree will the United States insist on, and Israel insist on real full demilitarization? And if not, do we resume military activities? And with regards to the Abraham Accords, the potential is absolutely there. In fact, it's become clearer than ever. Two major factors will be, will Gaza enter a period of calm, or will we receive renewed fighting? To what degree will the United States tie what each of those countries want from the United States to advancing ties with Israel? But I definitely agree that if we look 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, we will certainly see more countries joining the Abraham Accords.
And these are developments that we're just going to have to follow as closely as we can for the coming days. But that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank our distinguished panelists, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Advocate Maurice Hirsch and Asher Fredman. Thank you both so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
And meanwhile, as we discuss the prospects and the future of Gaza, clashes are being reported inside the Strip. There is a ceasefire, but the fighting continues, with Israel reporting at least 5 killed in fire exchanges between IDF troops and operatives who they say posed a threat to troops in the area. According to the IDF, a targeted airstrike on a vehicle took place in central Gaza, which followed intelligence of a Hamas-affiliated drone being used against troops in the area, posing an immediate threat and, of course, in violation of the ceasefire. And another front is also active. The Israeli Air Force struck 4 land crossings on the Lebanese-Syrian border. The IDF says they were being used to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah in positions in southern Lebanon and Syria. Earlier today, the military said they struck a key smuggler who ran a front company moving prohibited goods from Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf states into Lebanon. In addition, the IDF eliminated a Hezbollah operative who prevented a Lebanese army effort to dismantle a weapons depot and coordinating Hezbollah operations. The military says his actions violated the ceasefire and enabled weapons to be moved from the site. And finally, before we wrap up, we've got some exciting news. You can now get Israel updates on our WhatsApp channel. Breaking stories, live updates, and verified reports, all delivered fast and accurate. Just scan the QR code that's on your screen to join. And that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel and the heart of the Middle East. I'm Diva Klein, and I want to thank you all for joining. We will, of course, follow all of these developments as closely as possible, and I'll see you again very soon.